Sorry.
It's Dr. Dent's fault.
Thank you, Edie.
But it's so good to see you, Andrew.
You too. You too. These are some things that don't change in the world.
Yes. Except my creaking bones.
Oh yeah, tell me about it.
At Material ConneXion, we look at the world differently than most people do.
Brands come to us when they are facing a material problem. Maybe they have a great idea, but aren't quite sure whether there's a material out there that's going to support their needs.
A client may come to us saying they need a material that can be perhaps more sustainable or more stretchy or bouncy. It's my job to look at the fundamental material properties to solve that problem. We can provide clients with a unique cross-industry perspective because our library, which has been growing for the last 20 years, looks at materials from all industries, perhaps industries that our clients haven't looked at. Agriculture, medical, military, aerospace, that sort of thing.
We often see designers and engineers having vastly different discussions among one another. One will come with aesthetic as the primary focus, and engineers, of course, are going to come more with an idea of how are those materials going to fit. What we do that's unique is we offer a conversation where both of those groups can really come to the table and have one conversation.
For me, there's no other place like Material ConneXion. We have a depth of material experience through our library, and our material research is unparalleled anywhere else. I think it's fair to say that we're a partner rather than a service outsourcer.
What's changed the most about Material ConneXion since its inception is the way we collaborate with our clients. We are working with them end-to-end on product development, identifying ways that we can make their product better, stronger, lighter. It's a completely different experience. It's a collaborative experience.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Materials Connection webinar. I'm Bev Rivera, one of the material researchers at the Design Center of the Philippines, your moderator for today's webinar. As part of the exciting lineup of activities for Design Week Philippines 2023, today's webinar is brought to you by the Design Center of the Philippines in collaboration with Material Connection, the UP College of Fine Arts, and UP CFA Fab Lab. Today's conversation prompts us to explore innovative ways that address the dual concerns of waste reduction and minimizing our carbon footprint. This webinar is titled Solutions for the Packaging Industry in Times of Challenge and Opportunity. Before we formally proceed, let us hear from Design Center of the Philippines' very own Executive Director, Ms. Ria Matute, for her welcome remarks. Edie, Ria?
Thanks, Bev. Good afternoon, everyone. And a special good morning to Andrew, who's joining us at 3 in the morning, New York time. But yes, welcome to this year's edition of Design Week Philippines, and of course, as part of the team's effort to give you a very well curated content for Design Week, as well as to share the knowledge as well as the network in times of challenge and opportunity. And it's really, again, it's a big pleasure and honor of Design Center to have with us the world's leading expert in material innovation. I know I think maybe like Andrew's cringing when I say that he is the world's leading expert, but it's really just a I'm so excited for everyone joining us this afternoon to hear what Andrew has to share from his point of view of like seeing the material development as well as the evolution of material world and how we can use these developments to really design more responsibly for future generations. And I think that's really the challenge of our times, is really to understand the decisions that we make today really has consequences for the future of our of the next generation. And there is this saying, the seventh generation principle. You always have to think of any decision that you make now, and especially for designers who are very consequential in the future that we want the future generations to have. So before I hand you off to Bev and of course to Andrew, I just would like to thank, of course, the University of the Philippines College of Fine Arts, Fab Lab, of course, Tito de la Peña for partnering with Design Center for this exciting webinar, and of course, like with Tito and with Tito's help, bringing in the Fab Lab network of the Philippines. I'm so excited for you guys to be with us this afternoon, and of course to be able to share the rich knowledge as well as experience that Andrew has, given his experience in design as well as of course in material research and innovation. And of course everyone else that's joining us this afternoon, I hope you will enjoy the afternoon. And if you have like you're thinking of what you want to do over the weekend, we will be celebrating Design Week's culminating event here at the Philippine Trade Training Center on Saturday, a whole day on Saturday. We have several activities lined up. So if you think this afternoon is going to blow your mind, Saturday, we hope to really end the Design Week 2023 with a bang. So just follow us through our social media channels, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and we look forward to seeing you on Saturday if you can join us. And of course, thank you again for joining us this afternoon. And we hope that we give you inspiration as well as new ideas on how design can create a better future for everyone.
Thank you, Edie Rhea, for that warm welcome. Surely we're off to a great start this afternoon. I would also, again, like to acknowledge the UP College of Fine Arts and UP CFA Fab Lab as our official program partner. And before we dive into our main content, let's kick things off with a fun and interactive icebreaker activity using Mentimeter. I bet most of you have already used Mentimeter before, so simply share your thoughts or expectations on today's webinar using one word or a short phrase to create a word cloud together. To participate, please have your web browsers or Mentimeter app ready. Flashed on your screens is the QR code to access our Mentimeter, or you may use the code 2301-5960. Again, the code is 2301-5960. All right, we're starting to see some words in here. Keep it coming, guys. The more the merrier. Okay, I can see some words appearing on our word cloud. I'm seeing insightful, awesome, interesting. Your input is shaping our discussion today, and we want to hear it all from you. And these words represent the collective ideas and expectations from you guys. I hope that this webinar can meet all of those. All right. Thank you, everyone, for actively participating. And with that, I would like to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Andrew Dent, the Executive Vice President of Research at Material ConneXion and Chief Material Scientist at Sandow. Dr. Dent has helped hundreds of clients develop and improve their products through the use of innovative materials. A leading expert on his field, his insights played an important part in creating a new generation of more sustainable products. Dr. Dent also oversees the material knowledge of the Sampling Service Material Bank. He is a frequent speaker on sustainable and innovative material strategies, having given 2 TED Talks at TEDx Grand Rapids and TEDx NYC. He also co-created the Material Innovation book series, which includes packaging design, product design, and architecture. But before I give the floor to Dr. Dent, I would like to encourage everyone to please type in your questions or thoughts on the comment box or comment section if you are joining us via Facebook. We will revisit and discuss them later during our Q&A session. All right. Dr. Dent?
Thank you, Bev, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today. So yes, the title of my presentation is Solutions for the Packaging Industry in Times of Challenge and Opportunity. Certainly we are at a point in our development of packaging where there are both challenges, but are also opportunities as well. It was nice to see in that word cloud there was an awful lot of hope and desire for curiosity, for insight. My hope is that we can perhaps generate some of that during the presentation today. So what I want to do is take you through where we currently are when it comes to packaging, what the current concerns are, what the challenges are, and then also some of the opportunities that we can expect. I know that for the Philippines, packaging is something of great interest, and also sometimes great concern. It is a country which uses a lot of packaging, as we all do, but has specific needs when it comes to packaging. So I want to address some of those issues and some of the design solutions, some of the material solutions that are hopefully solving them. So, but first of all, I always like to go back a little bit and talk about our material world. So let's think about the sorts of materials that we're currently using. Just we put the packaging and the material aspect in context. So this slide, I tend to use this one just because it gives you an idea that we as a planet, as humans, we have been, in 2020 we consumed over 100 billion tons of materials, and the majority of that is going into things such as construction. So you can see with the image on the left hand side, you've got 50% of that is minerals, whether it's sand, whether it is ceramic type materials, whether it's clay, mud, those types of materials. The majority is still natural materials which are used in construction. We of course, 10% of that is ores, so metals. We use an awful lot of biomass, and by biomass we mean all the trees, all the food, all the cotton, the linen, all the things we're using for natural fibers in fashion and apparel, but also all of the food we're using. And fossil fuels, of course, being a major part of that as well, 16%. And of the fossil fuels, a lot is used in energy. But it's interesting to note that plastics accounted for less than 10% all petroleum-based products. So basically, about so less than 1%, less than 0.5% of all materials used annually are plastics, and yet they have a very outsized impression on our lives. Because when we see the concern about waste that we see out there in the streets, and it happens in outside my apartment in Brooklyn as well. The majority of it is these plastics. So even though it's such a small amount of the materials that we as humans are producing every year, it has an outsized impact on our environment. I wanted to know, how much materials. This is an image from a movie called WALL-E. It's basically where the planet become inhabitable by the volume of materials that we have produced and the amount of waste we produce. It turns out that every year, that 100 billion tons is about 50,000 football fields, the height of the Empire State Building. So it's an awful lot of materials. But as I said, the majority of it goes into things that have a much more durable use. The building that I'm in right now in my apartment is 15 years old. It will also probably survive, for the next 30, 50, even 100 years. So those materials have a very long lifespan, and therefore we can, so that has a viable use. When it comes to packaging, however, it is a lot more sort of single use. So that's our concern. So what do we mean when we talk about sustainability with reference to packaging? Well, I always like to use this image, and I've used it in the past, and I find it's a very impactful image. I would like to say there's no such thing as a sustainable material. And some people say, well, that makes no sense. Of course, I have plenty of sustainable materials. My whole life and business has been based upon sourcing and finding sustainable materials. What I mean by that is it is not possible to achieve sustainability by material alone. One can use a very sort of environmentally low impact material, but unless you're using it in the right way, it stops being sustainable. The example I'm giving here, and I use this all the time, is that this is the front end of a Boeing Dreamliner. It's a huge airline developed by Boeing, and that material there is carbon fiber. Now, carbon fiber is a nasty material. Its processing is very high energy. You use an awful lot of waste. The material itself isn't particularly nice, but it replaced something, aluminum as a shell. So in replacing the aluminum, which is inherently recyclable, much lower impact, I can use recycled content, I can recycle at the end of its life. That will be a class as a more sustainable material. But this one, because it's so much lighter, reduces significantly the amount of jet fuel used, such that this becomes a more sustainable solution, even though the material itself wouldn't be classed as a sustainable material. So it's all to do with context and application. Another example I use regularly, that in terms of when we think about sustainability and then also its next evolution, circular economy. Circular economy is trying to move everything into circles rather than linearly. So in that case, circular economy, if one was interested in circular economy, one would use a paper and one would use a paper-based carton or a paper-based cup rather than a styrofoam cup, because for circularity, that paper can go back into the system and is recycled quite easily and effectively. However, if you're just interested in sustainability and just the overall carbon footprint, then you should be using styrofoam every time. So it understands that the circular economy is not always the same as sustainability. Circular economy, we're interested in moving things in cycles. Sustainability is simply just a reduction of carbon footprint. And in a more sort of visual way, this is the way we used to produce, and this is the way we're trying to move away from. So this is the linear process where simply you bring things out of the ground, you produce them, you distribute them, you then use them, and at the end of the life, they go into a landfill. And of course, you've got this huge wasteful process. Our desire is more to move into cycles. The natural world works in cycles. We can also work in cycles, but it requires that you understand the material aspect. So is that material either in a biological cycle, so therefore is grown, used, and then potentially composted, or is it in a technical cycle where you understand I can't compost metals, I can't compost glass, so therefore it needs to go back into the system as a recycled material. Again, the idea of keeping things in the system rather than using them and then putting them into a landfill, and then not ending up as usable after that. So the circular economy is very much about trying to mimic nature, trying to mimic the way that you have the water cycle, the life cycle. There is no waste in nature. Our hope is that we can reduce significantly the amount of waste we have in our human production. So our plastics conundrum has very much been about how it's been such an effective material for packaging. We found it so useful. It's enabled us to dematerialize packaging quite significantly. It's enabled us to deliver clean water everywhere in the world. We can ensure now that we don't have to worry so much about the purity of water, because we can access it really quite easily through water bottles. But of course, it has an attendant problem, which of course is the amount of additional waste that we've created through delivering this essential good to humans. So in enabling the humans to get better access to clean water, the challenge has been that we're simply we're creating this massive amount of plastic waste. And a good example as well is of those materials that we're using, plastic waste actually consists of probably about half of all the plastics we're producing. Remember I said it's about 0.4% of plastics produced in the world? Well, of that, 51% is actually single-use packaging. So even though through design we are creating wonderful objects using plastics, and I think that we should not stop doing that. I think there's a viable life for plastics. However, for packaging, as you can see here, the majority of the plastics that we produce end up as single-use packaging. So the majority of plastics we use every year, the 400 million tons, is going to end up being used as packaging and then discarded in some way. So that's our challenge. It's packaging. So not plastics per se, but packaging. We have tried to reduce the amount of primary plastics we're using. We're using recycled and biopolymers, but at the moment still a very small amount. And that's already our attempt is to reduce the amount of virgin plastics that we're using and increase the amount of recycled and biopolymers. Now, some people say, oh, we want to go plastic free. And, I have been part of conferences where they say, we want to get rid of plastics altogether. We want to go plastic free. We want to try and find ways in which we're no longer using plastics. I want to be honest, it is not going to happen. The volume of plastics we're using, the type of applications we have at the moment, if we wanted to go plastic free, whether it's simply just by using using alternatives such as glass, metals, and ceramics and paper, etc., it is not going to be achievable. If we were to change our system so we're only using these plastic-free materials, we'd have to completely upend and completely change our entire plastic system, packaging system. We could, of course, go for no petroleum plastics and with bioplastics. I think that's fair enough, and also maybe with no virgin petroleum plastics. I think that one is the most viable. The one on the right-hand side, no virgin petroleum plastics. That I think is the ideal. We have to understand we are still going to use plastics in our packaging, but can we then use just recycled content or bioplastics rather than simply just using virgin? So what are the current status for trends in plastics and packaging? Okay, so unfortunately, as you saw in those graphs, virgin plastic is still king. But we are using a significant amount of increase in the amount of recycled materials. And I think that's a good thing. We are using some bioplastics, but not as much as I want to. But there is, I would say, a conflict between complexity and simplicity. What I mean by that is, if you think about the way in which, I don't know, let's say tuna. Tuna used to be packaged in a metal can. That was a relatively simple packaging solution. The new way in which we're finding tuna packaged is in pouches, and those pouches are more lightweight, so they're less energy to ship around the world. But as a result of needing to make sure that the tuna is kept clean and safe and fresh inside the container, your flexible packaging then contains about between 10 and 12 different layers of plastic. So you've increased significantly the complexity of that plastic. And that's the challenge we have, is that in solving one problem, we seem to have created another. Whereas a regular tuna can would be very easy to recycle because it's made out of metal and can be used with recycled content. The problem has been that in solving the problem of getting a lightweight package, we've then increased the complexity and made it harder to recycle. And as I said here, the volume of plastic production continues to increase. Of all the attempts we have to reduce plastic packaging, we are increasingly using more and more. So the solution cannot be simply stop using plastic. It's not working. We need to find ways in which we can reduce the amount of virgin plastics and find better end-of-life solutions. And I think this is worth mentioning as well. I bring this one out just because I think it's an interesting thought. Is packaging a carbon industry or a materials industry? And the reason why I say that is, in tackling the problem, carbon industries tend to be things where you're using an awful lot of energy, and that's the thing you have to be most concerned about initially. For architecture, we're more concerned about reducing the energy consumption of buildings than we are about the sustainability of the materials themselves. The same with automotive. For automotive, it's predominantly about reducing the carbon impact of the use aspect of the car. So for a car, I'm less concerned about the materials having an sustainable end of life. I'm more interested in reducing the amount of carbon dioxide it's producing through burning of fuel. A much more energy efficient car is much better. Despite no matter what materials you use, it's more important to get an energy efficient car or an electric car than it is to worry about the materials in the car. Same with home appliances. Home appliances last for 10 years, 15 years. So I'm more interested in their use case. For them, that's a carbon industry. For packaging, fashion and sneakers and footwear, it's very much about materials. There isn't so much energy used in packaging, but there's a huge amount of impact from the waste of the material. So for me, packaging, the problem with packaging is not to do with carbon footprint, it's to do with the materials themselves. And that's why that's the thing we need to tackle. So, as I said, if we're going to have to use plastic in some form, what are the end of life scenarios for packaging? What can we do with them? Now, I include this one just because we are not so good at recycling materials. This is one thing that we do need to increase significantly. And one thing I think, given that we are not going to stop using packaging, we still need the access to clean water to goods that we have, and they are going to be packaged in plastics. We're not going to go back to glass and metal. So therefore, we need to increase recycling rates. We can see here that the US is terrible. Places like India and places in Asia are a lot better. European Union's okay. And the reason why India is so good is simply because they treat the material as a valuable resource, and they try and find different uses for it rather than simply just putting it in landfill. I want to include recycling rates in the Philippines. So aluminum and glass, pretty good. Other metals pretty good. Paper's okay. Plastic is still low. And of this, the packaging plastics were even got even lower. So I think the challenge we have is, if we've got 30 to 70% recycling rate for aluminum, that's great. That allows us to maintain that infrastructure of recycled materials. But plastic is still our main concern. And the majority of this tends to be sachet use. And this is the challenge we're having, is that there is a concern, and these numbers, I think are quite astounding. That 59.8 billion sachets used in the Philippines each year, enough to cover the whole country in sachets or drown Metro Manila in 1 foot deep sachet. I think that to me is interesting. So those are our biggest concerns. Yes, of course, we need to be interested in other packaging formats, but the sachets is simply because of the way in which Filipinos use materials and the way that they consume products. Sachets are one of the biggest concerns. So we need to be tackling those types of issues. Yes, there are other ways to design around interesting packaging for, let's say, larger containers, but this is the one that also is the biggest concern right now. We can mechanically recycle, and we are seeing now better ways of recycling the sachets. Even though they are multiple materials, we now got ways of actually separating them out. It's actually getting better. We know that it's not always the best way to recycle because just because you've got a mixture of materials, but we're seeing, there is that much better viability with mechanical recycling. We've got a bunch of materials now which show that it's possible to recycle flex bags. We can produce a whole range of different products using mechanically recycled materials. So the recycling system, I think for me, it's very much that we need to increase that ability to recycle materials. That needs to be in tandem with a waste management system as well. Chemical recycling has become a lot more popular, and this one I think has a real future, mainly because as we increase the complexity of our packaging, as I mentioned, we have multiple layers within the sachet. A sachet will perhaps have 3 to 5 layers, maybe 7 layers. Maybe one of those layers will be an aluminum layer. Chemical recycling can solve that problem because what it does is it takes the plastic and brings it back to its original building blocks and enables us to make new materials out of it. So we've seen that with chemical recycling, you can actually produce viable packaging products from chemically recycled materials. And this, as I said, it solves the problem of complexity. It solves the problem of the types of materials, the different types of materials that you get with packaging. If my packaging sachet has polyester, nylon, polyethylene, and EVA, mechanical recycling, we can do it, but it's not as good as chemical. And chemical recycling allows us to separate out all those different plastics and actually have a viable end of life, being able to produce 100% recycled packaging from that. We've seen it with Coca-Cola and Pepsi. We've seen it in these types of packaging solutions. It is possible to then create a much more circular approach to the use of packaging if one can use chemical recycling. Now, of course, it is an advanced concept, and the challenge, of course, is to how do you then have a waste management system that allows us to put those sachets back into the system. And that, I think, is one of our biggest challenges, any type of recycling system needs to be in tandem, in concert with waste management changes. So it can't just be that you redesign the recycling system. You need adoption by all the users within the system. And this is our current challenge, is that the sachet is an easy thing to sort of leave around. It's not a large object. It's a little hard to recycle. But I think with these advances in chemical recycling, there is an opportunity to change that around. But I think it needs to be in tandem with the producers of the packaging themselves and also with the users. We need to have a much better education about the impacts of the little sachet that you're leaving there and how that impacts the waterways, the sea, the overall environment within the Philippines. So I wanted to include biodegradation or composting because I think this, given that it is hard to solve the recycling system and infrastructure within the Philippines, I think we need to be looking also at biodegradable materials as well. So recycling is great, but I think biodegradation is a viable option as well. And we've seen some innovations which enable us to see a way forward where some of these single-use packaging could potentially be a lot more quickly biodegradable, a lot more easily compostable. Now, what do I mean by that? Of course, it doesn't just mean bioplastics. One can have biodegradable plastics without that, and so biodegradable is where basically it means it breaks down within over time. Compostable means that it actually breaks down within a relatively short amount of time. So something can be biodegradable, I'm biodegradable, without necessarily being compostable. And this is only for plastics. If you use a natural material such as paper, you don't have to worry about this because it's only so biodegradability and compostability is only things that we concern ourselves with when it comes to plastics rather than the natural materials. So as I said, all organic materials are biodegradable eventually. including me, including you. And compostable means that they've passed a test to achieve certification. So when you look at a product and on the back it says this is backyard or industrially compostable, that means it's passed a test. If it simply says biodegradable, yes, it can be biodegradable, but styrofoam is biodegradable eventually. It just takes a few hundred years. So what are the compostable packaging plastics? What are the materials that we could potentially use? We've seen PLA out there. It is a viable solution. It is compostable. So the idea being that if left out in the environment, it will break down, not as quickly as natural materials, but will break down. So the idea being that eventually it will break down into carbon dioxide and hopefully food for microbes. Same things with things such as PHA, and we're seeing more and more packaging solutions using these types of resins. My hope is that we can use these types of biodegradable resins for things such as sachets, because then they will break down over time and not end up as basically a waste material and more sort of as food. So the idea of compostability really is that the materials can break down. And these, if you see these, although they are bright looking, they look beautiful like regular plastics, these will break down really quite quickly. PHA, both in the environment as well as in the sea as well. So get into the sea, these plastics actually break down quite quickly within a matter of months. You can add biodegradable additives to our regular plastics. So if I'm using, let's say, a soda bottle or a water bottle, it's possible, and that's made out of polyester, it's possible to add biodegradable additives. And there are some developments. This is a company in the UK that's got additive, where basically the plastic then will break down really quite quickly. And I think that really is hopeful for me, because, as I said, our current waste management system isn't working as well as we want it to. There's still an awful lot of waste going out into the ocean, into our waterways. So therefore, making sure that the plastic that ends up in that environment breaks down quite quickly for me is great. And you can't always use bioplastics because they don't always have the right sort of performance, right sort of barrier properties to make sure that your tuna or your coffee or your washing detergent, to ensure that they stay fresh and clean and they don't get a bad odor. So sometimes you can't use bioplastics. So in this case, you can simply use a biodegradable additive. So I think there are now innovations which allow us to manufacture things out of regular polyester and polyethylene and other regular plastics. Not ideal, but but then have them break down quite quickly as a result of these additives put into the plastic. There are, of course, some inherently biodegradable polyesters from virgin plastics, and that's fine. Again, the idea of biodegradation, something that breaks down quite quickly, because if we can have all of the plastic films that we currently use break down really quite quickly in the environment, that to me would dispel and would remove a huge amount of the waste that we're currently seeing in our water. We've seen as well a huge interest in how do we make plastic packaging from more natural ingredients. The PLA and the PHA, those things come from things such as sugarcane and bacteria. We've seen a lot of interest more recently in things such as seaweed. Now, the advantage with seaweed is it has a very quick growing cycle. So algae grows, it can grow a matter of meters in a matter of days. So whereas plastics coming from, let's say, sugarcane, which would take months to grow, or wood, which takes obviously years to grow, seaweed grows in days, and that's the advantage. And it has that advantage as well, that it can grow in a range of different environments. So we've seen a lot of interest in producing film packaging, injection moldable packaging from things such as algae, because we're able to industrialize it, therefore make it in high volume. It comes as transparent. It has good barrier properties to both moisture and air, and it's quickly home compostable and also and marine compostable as well. So these solutions where you've got single use, where you want a transparent bag, in this case, just holding up nectarines. So that seaweed packaging, that packaging doesn't need to do much. It simply just needs to hold the nectarines. It doesn't have to have a whole huge amount of performance. As long as it's strong enough to be able to hold the material itself, then it could be a great viable solution. It's nice and transparent. It looks clear, it looks nice. And we've seen a number of different companies, whether they're in the US, in Europe, in Asia, realizing that there is a great potential with algae to find replacement to virgin plastics. So this to me is an opportunity a bit of hope where we're seeing the use of industrializable natural materials being used in packaging, and it won't solve for everything. There will be issues for certain barriers and certain food or cosmetic products with this packaging. So it won't be a one size fits all. It'll be a way that you can solve this for, let's say, simple grocery bags, for produce bags, solve with seaweed-based packaging. Other plastics, maybe the PHAs and the PLAs, can be used for injection moldable containers for cosmetics. Understand that the advantage with these is that they're not just coming from a natural source, but they have that quick biodegradability. So therefore, when they're out there in the environment, they do break down into safe materials that are good for microbes and bacteria to eat. Cassava is a favorite one as well, and we've seen a lot of interest in these types of biodegradable bags. And I think there needs to be an approach that says that these are good enough. Now, one of the biggest challenges we have with modern humanity is that we continually want things to be better and better and better. And once we get things to be better, we don't want to go back. I think there needs to be understanding that in the solutions that we're creating with some of these biodegradable and bio-based materials, that as long as they work okay, that should be sufficient. We shouldn't have to expect 100% top performance for every material immediately. In that way, basically, we'll continue to use our virgin plastics, because there will always be some limitations, some compromises that need to be made when using these more innovative bio-based materials. They won't work quite as well, but I think we have to accept that is an acceptable way to move forward. If we are going to use these more sustainable solutions, I think the idea that everything should mimic exactly in terms of price and performance and everything regular virgin plastics, we will lose every time. We need to understand that we need to accept that these materials will have a slightly lower performance and be okay with that, because it means that therefore we've got the materials that no longer clog up our waterways, no longer last for 300 years in the ocean. So I think there needs to be an understanding that these types of solutions can be sufficient. We can use them, and I think there needs to be a greater adoption by us as consumers of these materials that are good enough and don't necessarily need to have always peak performance. Well, just in terms of availability of plastics, I thought in terms of bioplastics, I'm pushing these materials as biodegradable, as being a viable alternative. We have to understand as well that there are different generations of modern bioplastics, and different. There are some that are worse and some that are better, and it's very much the case that we are looking really for materials in bioplastics that come from industrializable source. So cassava is an industrialized crop, so that's usable. Seaweed can be industrialized and produced in high volume. We want to use materials that wouldn't necessarily be used for food. So the ideal is the things that couldn't be used for food. So bacteria and algae aren't typically used for food. So therefore, we're hoping that if we're going to industrialize and increase the volume of bioplastics that we want to use, they need to be from sources that are easy to industrialize and are not necessarily taken from food sources. We've seen a huge increase in the volume of bioplastics, and that's a great thing. Year on year, basically increasing, but it's not increasing fast enough, because of course it's competing with a lot of the regular plastics that we see. And the majority of them, I would say about half of them are from, if you look at that image, we're seeing like the total volume of bioplastics that have been produced. The sort of brown and sort of lighter color on the right-hand side, those are all the ones which are actually biodegradable. So the majority of the bioplastics we're producing are biodegradable. The ones on the left are more sort of more durable plastics, and that's great. And we can use those for more durable goods, whether it's toys, whether it's consumer electronics, whether it's apparel. I'm happy with using bioplastics for those, for durable bioplastics for those applications. But for packaging, we really want to be using the materials on the right-hand side. As I mentioned, the PLAs, the PHAs, the starch blends such as cassava, cellulose films. We really do need to be using as many biodegradable solutions as possible. And I also wanted to note just about natural fibers. We've seen some solutions out there, great design solutions where they're using natural fibers. Natural fibers are fine to use in your packaging, and can be a great solution, a great visual solution. The image there on the left is from natural fibers, as long as the plastic itself has the potential to biodegrade. Putting natural fibers in with regular plastics that you want to put back into the recycling system, that's not ideal. That really is a big challenge, because what you're doing is you're contaminating the recycling system. We think about the circular economy and that biological cycle and the technical cycle, whether something is grown, used, and then goes back into the earth for compost, or whether it's a technical cycle and it goes, and it basically needs to go back in the recycling system. Packaging products with natural fibers is mixing those two cycles up. You've got a plastic which should go back into the technical cycle, is recycled again and again and again, but you're putting in natural fibers which want to be composted. So in those two mixes, so if you're going to use plastics with natural fibers as a way of reducing the amount of plastic you're using, ensure that plastic is biodegradable, is compostable. So the natural fibers and the plastic can be composted as one. Now, I've talked a lot about, plastics, how we want to be able to try and use non-virgin, i.e. recyclable plastics, whether it's mechanically or chemically, that we should be using bioplastics where we can, that those plastics should be biodegradable if possible, just because currently within the Philippines, the waste management system does not allow us to, the hope is that we can get more recycling, but at the moment it does not allow us to put a lot of that plastic back into the system. A lot of it's ending up in the waterways and even in the ocean. So for plastics, we have a way forward, ways in which we should be doing. Of course, we could use paper as an alternative, and a lot of companies are trying to use paper as an alternative to plastic. We've seen a lot of development of how do we replace the current bottles, tubes, other containers that are used plastics. How do we then replace them with a paper alternative? A lot of innovation here. And it's interesting to see how that's happened and how we've moved a lot further forward than I would have expected, such that we do now have, whether it's coffee and espresso coffee containers, whether it's bottles for in this case liquor, whether it's paper tubes for cosmetics, we can now produce containers out of almost 100% paper that can replace plastic packaging for some of these applications. And that to me has been an incredible innovation and has happened probably in the last 5 to 8 years. So it's great to see how it is possible to innovate using a traditional material, paper, that we would have thought would not be conducive, would have not been a very good solution for things such as liquids, things such as coffee grounds, things that you need to keep dry. Because we think of paper, we think of paper being very susceptible to water. But with some of the modern film barriers and spray coatings that we're using, it's possible to use these papers as a rigid, impact-resistant container that can be used to contain highly sort of sensitive materials such as coffee grounds, and also quite caustic materials such as liquor within a bottle. So we've seen great innovations there, and I think we need to continue to see that. It will not be the only solution. Paper is not going to be the solution for everything. I'm not expecting us to see a complete change from plastic materials to paper, but it is interesting to see how through innovation and through a necessity, we're able to create completely new packaging systems that use traditional materials through innovating through barrier films, etc. So what you have is a pulped paper container, but then the barrier to liquid, to odor, to maintain freshness is through a very thin, in this case, organic coating that's on the inside and also the outside of those paper products. We're also getting better at sort of molding and the shapes and formats that we're using for paper as well. So it's interesting to see that through, we can actually solve some of the things we have through, whether it's styrofoam packaging, whether it is liquid and cream containers, we're able to do that through paper. And it is actually an interesting way to see that even though plastic will still maintain primacy, we are finding these alternative solutions through things such as paper. Now, I've gone through an awful lot of different innovations, but I want, in this final sort of outlook, So where do we go? What are our challenges and opportunities? As I've mentioned, we continue to produce more plastic. We're producing an awful lot of it. It is a small amount compared to the volume of other materials out there in the world. It's only 0.4% of all the materials we're producing every year. It does have an outside volume. And of the plastics we're producing, as I mentioned, 50%, over 50% is for packaging materials. So we understand that although the amount of plastics we produce is small compared to the volume of every other material, it has an outsized impact. And single-use packaging has a very specific impact because it has such a short lifespan. So it is a problem that we're trying to solve, but do not think we can suddenly design all plastic packaging away. Certainly, we should be designing to dematerialize. We should be designing to reduce the amount of materials we use. And we've seen that in the move from cans to pouches. So we've seen a way in which we can reduce the amount of materials, but understand that plastic packaging is not going away. We need to think about the materials that we're using in order to reduce the impact that we have from that plastic packaging. And as I mentioned, how we do that is through the use of recycled content, the use of bio-based materials, and because at the moment in the Philippines, we do not have a very effective waste management system, we need to think about biodegradability and compostability. Not every nation will have the same challenges as the Philippines. Certainly, the size and type of packaging that Philippines use is different than we would use perhaps in the US. In the US, I can go to a very large store called Costco, and I can buy a volume of laundry detergent which is massive. It's just the size of bigger than my head, and therefore I can use much more rigid packaging and I can recycle that. It's different in the Philippines, so we need to be designing based upon what the Philippine needs. As I said, so my belief is that we need to be moving more towards biodegradable materials, compostable materials, because if we accept that that packaging is going to end up out there in the environment, then I want it to break down relatively quickly. Of course, this doesn't mean we shouldn't be investing and innovating around waste management systems, and I think that is also important. So it needs to be a multi-pronged approach through consumer education, through innovation by the brands in order to ensure less virgin plastics, more recycled content, more bio-based content, and also to ensure that these things are potentially much more easily biodegradable. So that's the approach. And then there's design. And for me, I think design has the ability, as always, to change people's approaches to things. It may be that the design is used not just in the packaging itself, but also in the way in which we collect, in the way in which we sort of approach even the consumption of products. So I think design will always have a role, even though we're expecting consumer education, consumer change, government involvement, as well as brand involvement. I think design also plays a significant part because it is one of the few things that is able to change the way people do things. Design can change the way that we approach waste, with the way that we approach our consumption, etc. Design is able to change mindsets, and I think that's one thing we all need to consider, that without the use of design and making things, more enable us as consumers to do things in different ways, then we don't have much hope at all. So it needs to be a multi-pronged approach. It's consumers, it's government if possible, it's through waste management systems, it's brands making things more recyclable, or in this case more biodegradable, and it's also design to ensure that the packaging that we're using is something that we actually want to use and is easy to use. So how do we use design in order to change the way that consumers interact with that packaging, the way that they think about that packaging, whether it's graphic design to give it much more obvious what you're supposed to do with it, whether it is actual design to dematerialize the packaging itself, whether it's designed to make it more obvious about whether this is biodegradable, where to put it. So I think, we are not going to solve this problem just with one approach, and we can't blame just one aspect of the problem. We have to understand it's multi-problem. It's educating consumers, as I said before, educating consumers. It is government through waste management systems, it's brands through changing the materials they're using so things become more easily recyclable or more biodegradable, and then it's designed to basically bring it all together and to ensure that we as consumers don't feel like we're being shortchanged. Design, it enables us to increase the desirability, the enjoyment of products. So I want to, design is always going to be an important aspect in that. So that's kind of the presentation I wanted to give. Hopefully we've learned a little bit about some of the new materials that are available. I think some of, I've hammered home again. I think do not expect this to be a simple solution. It needs to be, everyone needs to get involved, and it needs to be also an understanding that these changes will require every single stakeholder to be involved. And I think, and we can also all do our little bit. The concern is always, well, me as one consumer, what can I do? Or one designer, what can I do? I think for me, what we have seen in the news at the moment, and what we're missing, sadly, I think, is two things. We are missing a sense of community and a sense of collaboration. None of these things can work unless we understand that we are part of a wider community, and we can't work unless we actually collaborate. It is never going to be possible for one brand or one person or one aspect of government to solve this problem. We need to understand that in order to solve this, we need to collaborate a lot more effectively and a lot more quickly. Understanding that these problems are bigger than each one of us individually. So my sort of end thought is, if you do nothing else today, if you want to move this thing forward, you need to talk to people and see how you can share and collaborate the work that you're doing with other people. Yes, of course, an individual design, an individual brand is never going to solve this. We need to see much greater collaboration between all aspects of this problem. You need to understand that you need to share and to give and to be more open and to collaborate between yourself and other people. So connect, collaborate, and that's the only way we're going to move this problem forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dent, for that presentation. And I love what you said on treating the material as a resource, because more often than not, we kind of view plastic as the evil in packaging. But through your presentation, we learned that there are innovations being done, and there are a lot of alternatives. And I would also like to agree that everyone needs to be involved right now to make the shift towards a greener future. And I hope this webinar kickstarts that conversation and collaboration. We challenge everyone and our participants to, get the gears and get the ball rolling. So thank you again, Dr. Dent.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you. And speaking of innovative materials, the Design Center of the Philippines' very own Smart Materials Project, Piñapel and Bacong, under its Material Research and Development Program, explores the potential of agricultural waste and overlooked resources as raw materials for many product applications. Piñapel is a locally processed and manufactured paper with the aim of providing environmentally friendly and commercially viable solutions to single-use plastics. Focus on packaging applications, corrugated paper cups, cup sleeves, and gift bags are some of the products that can be printed on while providing livelihood to local farming communities. Bacong, on the other hand, is a perennial aquatic plant formerly considered an obstruction within the community it coexisted with. Bacong is now a key source of livelihood and important material for a growing local industry. Bacong plant was processed and converted into materials that is geared towards the empowerment and rejuvenation of the Philippines' artisanal and industrial crafts. You may scan the QR codes flashed on your screens to learn more about Piñapel and Bacong. And moving forward to our Q&A program, I'm sure many of you have questions bubbling up, and we're genuinely excited to hear from you. Please do not hesitate to drop in your questions on our chat box, and Our expert, Dr. Dent, is here to provide you with insights and answers. And for our friends joining us on Facebook, feel free to use the comment section to ask your questions. We want this to be an engaging and two-way conversation, so don't hold back. Your thoughts and inquiries are most welcome. So let us call Dr. Dent once again so we can begin our Q&A.
Sure, yes.
Our team has been noting questions from attendees here on Zoom and on Facebook. I think.
So would you like me to sort of okay, so we've do you want me to answer some of the questions? I mean, I saw some of the questions in the chat. How do you want to go about this?
I'll read the questions and then you answer.
Okay.
So, incoming question for Dr. Dent. What are the cheapest bio-based material options for food packaging and sachets? Great start to our Q&A session.
Yes. You know, I always want to preface this. I want to start this with if all we care about is the price of something, we are inevitably going to lose. What I mean by that is, over the last 50 years, we have reduced the cost of plastics to a point where they are very, very inexpensive. So trying to replace a very, very inexpensive plastic with a new bio-based alternative is going to be a real challenge. And that's what, so I think that's the reason why we have things such as extended producer responsibility, EPR. Because if all we think about is the initial upfront cost of that packaging plastic, then yes, of course, we want the cheapest in that, and it'll just be basic plastic. What we're not including in that is the impact as a result of having then that plastic out there in the environment that then needs to be cleaned up, and the cost of that. So I think when we just talk about cost, I think we miss the bigger picture. But having said that, if we're looking at the least expensive, so PLA is quite low cost. PHA can be quite low cost. The cassava and starch-based plastics are quite low cost as well. Are they going to be exactly the same low cost as existing plastics? No. Are they going to get there to as low cost? I don't think they ever will. But I think we need to understand that if all you care about is just that initial upfront cost, then we are missing the point of circular economy and sustainability. And that is the reason why we got into the problem we're in right now. So I think, yes, there are, so the PLAs, PHAs, and cassava, those are relatively low cost. The seaweed plastic's not so low cost at the moment. The inherently biodegradable polyesters, those ones I think are actually really low cost. And so there are options out there, ones that are bio-based and also biodegradable. They do exist. It's just the, but I think in just wondering what the lowest cost is, we lose a little bit of the broader argument.
Thank you for that, Dr. Den. And I think PLA is quite low cost right now, that even some of 3D printer enthusiasts use them for some of their projects. And so moving on to our second question. So for compostable plastics, when they break down over time, does it affect the water quality? The person who sent this says that she's concerned as that they break down, they will contaminate groundwater and other water resources. Great question.
That gets to, I think, one of the thing I love about materials is that it's in the details. So yes, we can have a wonderfully compostable plastic, bioplastic that breaks down, but yes, you're right. What does it break down into? And also, if it is colored, if it's a wonderful bright color, or if it's been printed onto with some ink, what do they break down into as well? So it's never just the plastic; it's also the things you add into the plastic to make it blue or green, and things you use to print onto it. So not all plastics will break down safely. So yes, there are some specific plastics. Typically, bioplastics tend to break down into things which are edible by microbes. The idea is ultimately what you want to happen is when a bioplastic breaks down, it breaks down into carbon dioxide, In the same way that a tree that's basically rotting in the forest, and it breaks down into food for microbes and bacteria, and then also carbon dioxide. That's an inevitable part of the carbon cycle. So yes, you need to ask the plastic supplier, if they're offering you a compostable plastic, what does it break down into? They should know. But the idea is that microbes and bacteria are pretty good at eating these materials, and they will find a use for it. They'll break it down. It'll go down from a long chain polymer. They'll break it down into a shorter chain polymer as they eat it. So for the most part, the bioplastics tend to break down quite safely. The issue is the additives. So ensure that in the pigments that you color them with, the additives maybe for other performance aspects, and also the printing that you put onto it, you need to make sure that those things will break down into something safely as well. So plastic's pretty much okay as long as it's bioplastic. It's the additives and the inks that you need to also be concerned about.
Okay, thank you again for that, Dr. Dan, and glad to know that bio-based ones are safe too. Okay, so next question. Plastic already has a negative stigma, so how do you recommend explaining to an audience that simply not using plastic for packaging isn't always the best way to go?
Oof. Yes. I would love to have a great answer to that one. That one's always a challenge. We are, as I mentioned at the start of the presentation, plastics they have a negative stigma, yes. Have they enabled us to have access to resources that we never would have been able to have previously? Yes. So it are both good and bad. So I think it has to happen through. Yeah, this one's a challenge because we have a number of different competing issues at the same time. Trying to get better waste management systems, trying to make sure that our recycling is better, trying to develop biodegradable plastics so that they can then biodegrade within the ocean and within our water, on our land. I don't think that's an easy one to answer. I think it is a combination of things. I think it's simply because it would be unfair to restrict people's access to things. But ultimately, I think, and I think I read some polls that in the Philippines, the majority of Filipinos, 73%, I think it was, are all for restricting the types of materials that we can use. So I think, to a certain extent, I think it needs to be a combination. I don't think we're going to. I think we need to educate people about the materials they're using, and my hope is really educate them to reduce the amount of waste that they are developing. I think that's all we can do. Yes, it's not an easy one to answer. I don't really have a great answer for it. I would love to. I think it's just education about the impacts of the waste that we are creating, and hopefully have them then take greater care about the waste that they're producing. That's not a great answer, I know. I would love to have a better answer for it. I think because there are so many competing issues at the same time. It's the challenge to have one answer which solves everything.
Yeah, that was a tough question, but I think this is where we come into, we do our legwork to try and, approach other people and on ways and how we could explain that using plastic for packaging isn't always the best way to go. So come on, guys, keep your questions going. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, actually, Bev, can I add that there's one here where it says that a semantics issue, sustainable versus regenerative. I'd like to take that one, if that's all right.
Sure.
Okay, so someone's asking what's the difference between sustainable and regenerative. Now, the word regenerative, if we think about the evolution of this movement, we have gone from sustainable to circularity. We understand that now, that circularity is more trying to create things in natural cycles. Regenerative is a word that's being more widely used, and the idea of sustainable is the idea of something just to sustain or to maintain. I think the regenerative is where you're actually improving the environment once you've left or once you've done it. So the idea of not just planting some crops, but ensuring that the farmer is able to maintain a viable standard of living, that you're also promoting sort of cleaner waterways around them. So the idea of regenerative is that, in its own word, is that rather than just maintaining, that you're actually improving the environment in which you're acting. So regenerative is always looking to improve and to enable an enhanced environment once you've actually finished doing what you're doing. So it's more to do with sort of, rather than just keeping things at a zero level. So rather than having zero carbon footprint, the idea is zero carbon footprint plus improved water, improved environment, improved their social and environmental issues as well. So it's more to do with like enhancing and improving their environment as opposed to just maintaining.
Thanks for that, Dr. Dent. Let me see if there are any more questions here. Okay, we have one more. What are your thoughts on sustainable packaging for transporting live organisms such as fisheries and aquaculture resources? Do we focus on design or material, as we know that PH is one of the main producers in this part of the industry?
Well, I think, if you're if it's live organisms for agriculture, I think do we focus on design or material? Well, both, I would say. I think especially if you are transporting, organic material that are part of the environment in which you're polluting, I think it is even more important to solve that problem with materials that do no harm, that can be composted easily, that are marine degradable in some way. Now, of course, you'll say, well, if it's marine degradable, then the problem is that isn't it going to degrade while it's being used? If it's packaging, inevitably it's going to have a relatively short lifespan. So it's possible to have something which does degrade quite slowly while it's being used as packaging, and then more over time. What I mean by that is, I always take the example of my shirt. The shirt I'm wearing right here is 100% cotton. Well, cotton is biodegradable. Cotton is compostable, and yet I wear it and I wash it. I can wash it 50 times. So it is possible to use compostable materials without them composting right there and then. You've just got to have, So I think there's, for me, I think it's a combination of materials and design. And I think for anything where we're transporting the thing in which, if we're transporting marine life, then my thought is it's even more important to have something which is a more sustainable solution that can degrade in marine environments, that is not going to then impact the fisheries or other environment after the end of its life. So both, but I think even more so than any other packaging, I think stuff that's transporting marine life, you'd need to have it that it is potentially marine degradable at the end of its use.
Thanks. Thank you again, Dr. Dent. So, another question here is, was there a specific type of algae or seaweed used for the example earlier?
I saw this question coming up and I thought, that's a good question. Yes. I don't have the specifics. What I would recommend, will this presentation be available to attendees afterwards? Because I've got links in the presentation. If it's available, there is the link. That was actually a company called Sway. I think on their website they do tell us what the seaweed is. I think different seaweeds obviously have different performance and different properties, and different people are using different ones. I must admit, I'm not a biologist, so I don't know the specifics. What I would recommend is, first of all, go onto their website. I think it's called swaythefuture.com. But if you can see the presentation, it's in there. If you can't find it there, email me and I can see whether I can perhaps we can get a little bit more information for you. I would love to, I'd love to have an answer. I don't have a specific about the seaweed, but I can find out if you'd really like.
I'd like to ask Dr. Dent, is that material in the Material ConneXion database?
It will be in about 2 or 3 weeks.
Okay.
We've known about Sway for a little while. They've gone to some of the conferences. We just got some good samples. We only put it into the database once we got samples. So it just got voted in last week, actually. So we'll probably be in the database within about a week or two.
All right, because I think this is a perfect moment to segue and promote. The Design Center is have a subscription in Material ConneXion database. So in a week or two, we would like to invite you guys to visit us here at Design Center, and you may check the Sway postings in the database. All right, so few more questions here. Whew. Keep it coming, guys. Sustainable packaging includes plastic that is highly recyclable, can only be sustainable once it addresses the whole value chain, which not a lot of companies or customers can fully comply to. How do we address these gaps and streamline how these alternatives can combat single-use plastics?
Well, if I could answer that, then we'd all be fine. It's a great question. It is, it's that's basically what our current challenge. I think the answer has to be that, as I said in the end, we collaborate. There's no other way. I think this problem is being tackled by everyone around the world. And some countries are doing certain methods, and I think it's not a one size fits all for every country. Every country will have different, and there's another question about the issue of a lot of Filipinos live in poverty, so therefore they are not going to be they're not thinking about waste management systems. That's not something on their mind. They're thinking about making sure their family is healthy, is fed, is happy. Waste management is not a concern of theirs. So yes, and that it has to be a combination of all aspects. I think of it, as I mentioned at the end of the presentation, it's collaboration between government, between asking the consumers to solve it. I think I'm tired of hearing that, to say, well, consumers need to be better. We need to be better. Humans are lazy and selfish. We are just by nature. That is not going to be the solution. If a consumer can do it easily, very easily, then fair enough, we might be able to change people's mindsets through design, but it needs to be made very, very easily. So for me, a lot of it has to do with, yes, better recycling infrastructure if we can, but also the brands as well. I think there needs to be a more concerted effort by the brands. Of course, the brands are worried about their bottom line. So I think for me, it would be a combination of brand plus government. Government through extended producer responsibility, brand through improving its product, because they could produce the solutions tomorrow if they wanted to. The innovation is there. They'd have to pay more for it, and so therefore the profitability wouldn't be as high. We would have to pay more for it as consumers, and of course that's a challenge. But I think there is a way forward, and it has to be again a collaboration between all stakeholders. We cannot rely upon just the consumer. That won't work. But yes, this is the problem of our time, is how do we get all of these people to talk together and to push hard enough by government, innovate well enough by brands, and then through design, change the mindset of consumers.
Thanks for that, Dr. Dent. And one last question. So those questions that we weren't able to go through, we would collect them all up and try to answer it post-webinar. Okay, so for our last question before we wrap up, the presentation mentioned the importance of design in sustainable packaging. What are some key design principles or considerations that companies should keep in mind when creating environmentally friendly packaging?
Circularity. They need to be considering what's going to happen at the end of the life for whatever that is. That needs to be the primary concern. Because remember I talked about, is it a carbon or is it a materials industry? Packaging is a materials industry. The most impactful thing that packaging has is the material, and the most impactful aspect of the material is what happens at the end of its life. yeah, because we've already solved for consumer engagement. We've already solved for the performance of the packaging. We now need to solve for end of life. So design always needs to be thinking about, yes, dematerialize, reduce the amount of materials you can, where you can avoid using plastic, yes, of course. But so design, the first thing you need to be thinking about with design is what happens when someone's finished with it. What happens to it next? What can I do in design to enable that consumer to find it easier to recycle it, that consumer to maybe have it more biodegradable and compostable? Is there a way in which I can use design to just make that end of life just maybe more viable? I think that for me is the most important aspect. Yes, of course, you want it to look pretty and for people to purchase it. Yes, I understand that. But design's been doing that for decades. We've solved all the problems apart from end of life. That's the one that's the most important. That's the one that design still needs to tackle, and it has not solved yet. So that for me is all the energy needs to go into that, because everything else has been solved to a greater or lesser degree. It's end of life is the main thing you need to still solve.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dent. I agree with what you said, that in circularity, we also need to design with the end in mind. And final question, we would love to know, what part of your job do you love the most? I mean, most of the questions during our Q&A session were quite challenging, so we'd like to end this webinar with a light note.
With everything, think about every TV show that you've ever, the most engaging TV shows, the most engaging series tend to be about the law, police, hospitals. Basically, it's human interaction, and that for me is the most enjoyable part of the job. You know, I deal with materials every day, but it is in the human interactions and the ability to educate and also to learn. You know, because my advantage, I get to talk to a bunch of amazing people. I get to interact with all these incredible creative people, and I get to learn from them. For me, that transferal of knowledge, where I can learn something from them, and hopefully I can inspire them or show them a new way of doing something. That for me is the most important part of the job, and that was why the pandemic was such a challenge for me. Once we'd lost, you know, when everyone was sitting at home and we interacted through Zoom, you know, webinars and Zoom could be great, but that human one-to-one interaction, face-to-face, I think is, you know, where you can exchange just knowledge and energy and that level of curiosity and hope. That to me is the most important part of the job, and that's why I'm still in the same job after close to 25 years, is because I'm continually meeting new people, and there's always new stuff to learn. There's always new ways to influence. So I think that for me is, it's, you know, people ask what your favorite material is. It's never been about the material. It's always been about that human interaction. How do you get people to change their mind? How do you get people to be more curious, more hopeful? How do you get them to change their ways so they can offer more sustainable solutions, so they can impact their brand or the business they're working in? That to me has always been the most enjoyable, and it will continue to be. So materials are great, people are better.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dent. And that concludes our Q&A session. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. And hopefully we can hold the next MCX webinar face-to-face, so we can finally personally and physically meet each other.
That would be nice.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure having you as our speaker. And for our participants, I hope that our discussion on solutions for the packaging industry in times of challenge and opportunity has enlightened and inspired you to help create sustainable products and save our Mother Earth. To our participants, again, let us reshape our waste management habits. Recycling, reusing, and reducing waste isn't just a responsibility, but a way of life. Challenge yourself and those around you to adopt these practices. And quick reminder before you leave the room, we'd like to ask for your participation in our post-webinar feedback survey. Your feedback is invaluable to us, as it helps us improve our future webinars and tailor them to your interests and needs. You can access the form through the QR code displayed on your screens, or by simply clicking the link provided at the chat box. And As a token of our appreciation, all participants who completed the feedback form will receive a certificate of participation in their email. So please take a moment, guys, to scan the codes or click the link and let us know your thoughts. And again, I would like to take this opportunity to invite everyone to visit the Material ConneXion's wall here at our office for more information on new material and packaging innovations. And you may also visit our resource center for design-related reference materials. Tune in to Design Center's social media accounts for the Design Week Philippines 2023 events lineup. That's DDI-Design Center PH. Once again, thank you and see you all on our next Material ConneXion webinar. Bye!
Thank you.